Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're diving into a show
It's
that's
a wild one.
it really is. It's a wild one. It's called Lexx.
L-E-X.
Yes, thank you, Lexx. And it's
How would you even describe Lex?
oh gosh, that's a tough one. It's part space opera, part dark comedy.
A lot of weird sci-fi.
Yeah, definitely a lot of
I
weird.
love a lot. Oh,
Like buckle up, folks. We are all along for the ride.
it takes you places, that's for sure.
It really does. And one of the things that makes it so unique, I think, is the characters.
Oh, absolutely.
They are not your typical sci-fi heroes, are they?
No, not at all. You've got a security guard,
Yeah.
right? A cowardly security guard who somehow ends up destroying billions of lives.
Yeah, talk about a bad day at the office.
And then there's this love slave, right? But
Yeah.
he's also part lizard.
Yeah, it's wild. Her DNA gets all mixed up. And then to top it all off,
Oh, and a dead assassin.
don't forget the dead assassin. You can't leave him out.
I mean, where do you even begin with a lineup like that? It's like they took every sci-fi trope and just threw it in a blender.
And hit puree.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Somehow it works.
Yeah, it really does. Lex takes these characters that, on the surface, seem totally bonkers and turns them into something, well, kind of brilliant.
It's unexpected, it's funny, and sometimes it's even kind of profound.
Right. Who would have thought a show about a giant bioengineered spaceship could make you think about life, death, and everything in between?
Only Lex.
So who do we meet first on this wild ride?
Well, it all starts with Stanley H. Tweedle.
Ah, Stanley. The everyman. If every man accidentally destroyed billions of lives.
Played to perfection, by the way, by Brian Downey. If you haven't seen the show, just picture the most hilariously inept person you can imagine.
And then add a dash of cosmic significance.
Because Stanley, he's the epitome of the accidental hero.
Right.
Lazy, selfish, always looking for the easiest way out.
Which, in the Lex universe, usually involves some kind of intergalactic crisis.
But somehow, despite himself, he ends up saving the day. Or at least not making things demonstrably worse.
It's amazing how they take this character who, let's face it, is kind of a loser.
Kind of. He's the definition of a lovable loser.
Okay, you're right. He's a lovable loser. But somehow, Lex makes you root for him, even when he's running away from responsibility faster than the Lexan can travel through a transdimensional rift.
Because deep down, under all that cowardice and self-interest, there's a glimmer of something good in Stanley.
It's like he doesn't want to be the hero, but someone's got to do it.
And by some cosmic coincidence, that someone always seems to be him.
Now, we've got to talk about the arch traitor thing, because that's a pretty hefty title for someone who's more likely to spill his drink than conquer a planet.
Right. I mean, he's branded as the universe's most wanted criminal, but in reality...
In reality, he tripped over a button that destroyed a planet or something like that.
Pretty much. And that's classic Lex. It takes these grand expectations, these serious sci-fi tropes, and just turns them on their head.
Subversion at its finest. You think you're getting a typical space opera, and then bam, you're laughing at the absurdity of it all.
Exactly. Which is why Stanley is such a fantastic entry point into the world of Lex. He embodies that perfect blend of the ridiculous and the surprisingly thought-provoking.
It's like we're laughing at him, but we're also kind of laughing with him, you know? Because who hasn't felt like they're in over their head in this universe that makes no sense?
Oh, absolutely. We've all been there.
So we've got Stanley, the accidental hero, running from a destiny he doesn't understand. And then we meet Zev. And oh boy, Zev is a whole other story.
Talk about making an entrance.
You mentioned earlier she was a love slave, right? What's her deal?
Well, imagine being considered hopelessly ugly, like they literally tell her in the show.
Harsh.
Right. And it's not just some random insult. In this world, she's considered unfit for marriage because of her looks.
Okay, I'm sensing some messed up societal norms here.
You're not wrong. She's trapped in a system called the wife bank. The wife bank. It's exactly what it sounds like. They take young women.
Oh, no. This is not sounding good.
Yeah, it's pretty messed up. They essentially raise these women to be wives, often through some, shall we say, unconventional methods.
That's putting it lightly.
It's a very Lexic way of exploring themes of control, power, and societal expectations of women.
And obviously, Zev's not having any of this, right? She's not exactly the type to just accept her fate.
Oh, absolutely not. She rebels.
Yeah.
Big time. And this rebellion, it leads to a chain of events that, well, let's just say, change her life forever.
So fill me in. How does a hopelessly ugly woman trapped in a wife bank end up becoming a lizard-enhanced, planet-hopping badass? Because we got to get to the lizard part eventually.
We do, and trust me, it's even wilder than it sounds.
So how does she escape this wife-bang situation?
Well, it all starts with a rejection, believe it or not.
Ouch.
Yeah, her designated husband-to-be, he takes one look at her and basically says, no thanks.
I can't imagine that did wonders for her self-esteem.
Right, but here's the thing about Zev. She doesn't let it crush her. In fact, it kind of lights a fire under her.
Oh, this sounds promising.
Oh, it is. So she ends up escaping, going on a bit of a rampage, and landing herself in prison.
Of course. It wouldn't be Lexx without a prison break.
Exactly. But this isn't just any prison. This is a prison on the cluster. Think giant artificial world ruled by a decadent and corrupt government.
Sounds delightful.
It's very Lexx, and it's here in this dystopian paradise that Zev's transformation truly begins.
Okay, so we're finally getting to the lizard part.
We are. See, her sentence for, well, being Zev is to become a love slave.
Wait, they're still trying to force that whole thing on her? Even after the prison break?
Oh, yeah, they're determined. It's all about control, you see.
Makes sense in a messed up kind of way.
Right, so they try to brainwash her, reprogram her into being this submissive, obedient, whatever you want me to be kind of love slave.
But knowing Zev, I'm guessing this doesn't go according to plan.
You know it. Something goes haywire during the process.
Haywire, how? Does she break free? Does she fight back?
She does both, in a way. But it's more than that. See, whatever they were trying to do to her mind, it interacts with her biology in this completely unexpected way.
The lizard DNA finally kicks in.
It does, and not subtly either. She emerges from this process completely transformed. We're talking physically stunning, enhanced strength, and
Don't leave me hanging.
an appetite, let's call it. That's, well, a side effect of the whole lizard DNA thing.
So it's not just a physical transformation. It's like she's been unleashed, right? All her inhibitions, everything holding her back, it's just gone.
Exactly. And this is where Zev really comes into her own. She's no longer defined by what others think she should be. She's powerful, she's confident, and she owns every bit of it. Seems like Eva Haberman had some scheduling issues, which happens, right?
Oh, scheduling conflicts are a tale as old as time in television.
Right. But instead of just writing Zev out, they brought in Xenia Seberg and, well, used the whole sci-fi setting to their advantage.
It's actually a pretty clever workaround.
Yeah.
Instead of ignoring the change, they lean into it. They use reanimation to explain Zev's new look.
So they found a way to have their cake and eat it too, a major character change while keeping the story going.
Exactly. Which brings us, I'm guessing, to a certain dead assassin.
Ah, okay. Now there's a character you can really sink your teeth into.
Because he's dead.
Well, that's one way to put it. But Kai, he's so much more than just your average run-of-the-mill dead guy.
I'm sensing a butt coming.
But he's also an incredibly skilled assassin programmed for one purpose: to kill.
Right, you mentioned that earlier. And he's played by Michael McManus, right?
That's right. And let me tell you, he brings this incredible intensity to the role. Kai is brooding, he's mysterious.
And he's dead.
And he's dead. Which, let's face it, makes for some interesting relationship dynamics.
To say the least. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we dive into the whole Zev and Kai saga, let's rewind a bit. You mentioned he wasn't always a dead assassin. What's his backstory?
Kai's past. It's a tragic tale, filled with betrayal, loss, and a healthy dose of cosmic horror. You see, before he was a servant of death, he was a Brunningi.
A what now?
Brunningi. They were a warrior race, known for their honor, their strength, and they were facing extinction.
Okay, now that's just depressing. Who was picking on the noble warrior race?
That would be his divine shadow.
His divine shadow. That sounds ominous.
That's because he is. Imagine a being so powerful, so utterly evil that even saying his name is considered taboo.
Got it. We'll stick with his divine shadow. So this divine shadow character, he's the one who kills Kai.
Well, yes and no. You see, Kai was the last of his kind. He led a final, desperate stand against his divine shadow's forces to try and save his home planet, Brunnis 2.
Brunnis 2. Catchy. So I'm guessing this last stand doesn't go so well.
It does not. Kai fights bravely, but he's ultimately overwhelmed. He dies defending his people, his world.
That's rough. But death isn't the end for Kai, is it? That's where his divine shadow comes in.
You got it. His divine shadow sees potential in Kai, even in death, so he resurrects him.
As a thank you for the valiant effort.
Not quite. You see, his divine shadow, he has a twisted sense of humor. He doesn't just resurrect Kai. He strips him of his emotions, his memories, everything that made him who he was.
And turns him into his personal assassin.
Exactly. Kai becomes this perfect weapon. Ruthless, efficient, incapable of fear or remorse.
Talk about a raw deal. It's like, not only did you lose everything, your people, your planet, but now you're forced to serve the very entity who took it all from you.
The ultimate betrayal. And that's the tragedy of Kai. He's trapped in this horrific existence, a prisoner in his own undead body.
So he's basically a puppet, a dead assassin with no will of his own, forced to do the bidding of this cosmic horror.
Pretty much. And this is where it gets really interesting, a flicker of Kai's former self reemerges when he encounters the Lexx.
Oh, so this is how it all comes together.
Yeah.
They're all drawn to this bizarre planet-destroying ship.
It's like a beacon for broken toys, lost souls, and those seeking something more than the universe seems willing to offer.
Okay, I like that. A beacon for broken toys.
Yeah.
But how does a dead assassin, programmed for obedience, break free? Even a little.
Well, it's not a conscious decision, not at first. Remember, his divine shadow. He sees the Lexx as this powerful weapon, an asset he wants to control.
Makes sense. It is a pretty sweet ride, even if it does look like a giant insect.
Right. So he sends Kai to secure it. But something happens when Kai gets close to the Lexx. It's like this bioengineered ship. It recognizes something in him.
Recognizes what?
A kindred spirit, maybe? A fellow being trapped, misunderstood. It's never explicitly stated, but there's this connection, this spark between them.
I'm sensing a theme here. Because you said the Lexx was drawn to Stanley too, right?
Exactly. It's like this ship, this weapon of unimaginable power. It sees something special in the most unlikely of places.
So Kai starts to break free from his divine shadow's control because of the Lexx.
It's more like the Lexx awakens something dormant within him, fragments of memories, feelings he didn't even know he was capable of experiencing.
Okay, but this is still his divine shadow's assassin we're talking about. Doesn't he try to reel Kai back in?
Oh, absolutely. There's this constant struggle, this push and pull between Kai's programming and these re-emerging fragments of his former self.
That's got to be rough, to be caught between a cosmic horror and a giant insect-shaped spaceship.
Talk about a dilemma.
Ugh.
But that's what makes Kai such a compelling character. He's constantly wrestling with his own nature, questioning his purpose. He's both terrifying and tragic. And here's where we get into some really interesting territory, because Zev, she's drawn to Kai's mystery, his intensity. She sees something in him that she wants to understand, to connect with.
And Kai, what does he make of all this attention? I mean, the guy's not exactly known for his emotional availability.
And yet there's something about Zev that gets to him. He might not be able to feel love in the traditional sense, but he's drawn to her strength, her spirit. He recognizes a kindred spirit in her, someone who's also fighting against the constraints of their past, their programming.
And all the while, 790 is watching this unfold, muttering sarcastic comments under his breath.
Oh, 790 is not happy about this development. He's head over heels in love with Zev, but his way of expressing it usually involves a lot of insults and passive-aggressive jabs.
It's like that saying, the best way to a woman's heart is to insult her repeatedly and belittle her love interests.
Words to live by, apparently, at least if you're a disembodied robot head from the Lexx universe. But seriously, 790's jealousy, it's more than just possessiveness. It speaks to this deeper longing for connection, for understanding.
So we've got this weird love triangle going on. Zev's into Kai, Kai's struggling with his own emotions, and 790's over there in the corner plotting everyone's demise.
It's classic Lexx. But let's not forget about the Lexx itself. The ship plays a crucial role in all of this. Remember, it's not just a setting, it's practically a character itself.
Right. You mentioned it's like a giant bioengineered baby.
Basically, it has this incredible power, capable of unimaginable destruction, and yet it has the emotional maturity of a toddler. It needs guidance, reassurance, and someone to explain why it shouldn't fire its main weapon at every shiny object that passes by.
And that's where Stanley comes in. He's not just the captain. He's the Lexx's reluctant babysitter.
Which is hilarious to watch because Stanley, let's face it, he's barely got his own act together.
He's figuring it out as he goes along, just like the rest of us.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of Lexx. It's a show that embraces the absurd, the unconventional. It challenges our expectations of what sci-fi can be, what a hero can be, what love can be.
It's weird. It's wild. It's thought-provoking. It's Lexx.
Right, and I think that complexity is what really grabbed people. The show got dark, got philosophical, but never took itself too seriously. It could be jarring, honestly, but when it worked, it really worked.
That's where you get those mixed reviews, right?
Yeah.
Critics back then, they struggled with those tonal shifts. One minute it's a deep dive into cloning ethics. The next it's slapstick comedy with a malfunctioning love doll.
Yeah, those tonal shifts were definitely a choice. But even the harshest critics had to admit, visually, Lexx was doing something different. Those early 2000s effects. Okay, maybe not timeless, but there's a charm to them, this raw, tangible quality.
Oh, absolutely. And if you geek out on the technical side, it's even more impressive. They use miniatures, forced perspective, all these techniques common then, but they made the Lex feel massive, like it was really there.
Oh, you totally believed it was this huge, terrifying, living thing. But as groundbreaking as Lex was, we can't ignore its flaws. Sometimes the writing was all over the place, some storylines felt unnecessary.
Oh yeah, the Brigadoon episode, the
Yeah.
ultimate example of how polarizing Lex could be. Hated by some, pure Lex brilliance for others.
Exactly. It's that unpredictable, divisive nature that makes talking about Lex so interesting, even now.
Which leads to that question everyone's asking, could a Lex reboot work today? I mean, sci-fi's huge now, but can you capture that same weirdness, that mix of philosophy and slapstick that Lex just nailed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? So let's break down the pros and cons of a potential remake. Could Lex thrive in today's TV landscape? And the big one, remake, reboot, or just leave this cult classic be? So Lex, this weird, wonderful show that made you think as much as it made you laugh.
And even all these years later, people are still talking about it, debating it.
Exactly. Which brings us to that question buzzing around the internet like a lovesick cluster lizard. Could a Lex reboot actually work now?
Well, think about TV today.
Okay.
Sci-fi and fantasy are everywhere.
True.
And shows aren't afraid to get weird, to explore those big philosophical ideas.
Right, like Severance or the peripheral shows that really get in your head.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where a Lex reboot could be perfect.
Mhm.
There's already this built-in fan base just waiting for it.
Not to mention all the memes and those fan casting threads where Margot Robbie's already playing Sev.
Exactly. They're ready.
Yeah.
And the special effects now. Imagine what they could do with the Lex itself.
Oh my gosh, the possibilities.
Right.
It could be beautiful and terrifying at the same time.
Exactly. You can see all those little biomechanical details, the sheer size of it, in a way they just couldn't back then.
Although part of what made the original so great was that lo-fi look. I mean, who could forget those gloriously cheesy explosions?
That's true.
A new version would have to strike that balance really carefully.
Yeah, you have to keep what made the original special even with updated effects.
Totally. And what about the tone? Lex could be super dark and edgy one minute, then completely absurd the next. Would that work for today's audience?
It's risky for sure, but the right showrunner, someone who understands that line between funny and scary, smart and strange, it could be amazing.
Someone who isn't afraid to take risks to make the audience squirm a little.
Right. And don't forget about all the stories they could tell. The history of the Lex, the Brunn G, all that stuff they only hinted at.
Or go in a completely new direction. New crew, new problems, new threat to the light universe.
So many possibilities. But there's one thing they can't mess up. One crucial element.
And that is the characters. I mean, you can have the coolest spaceships and the craziest plots, but without good characters, who cares? And Lex had characters for days.
Oh, totally. Characters who were all messed up and funny, and you wouldn't think you'd relate to them, but you totally did, even though they were, surrounded by all that Lex weirdness.
And that's the thing with a reboot, right? How do you capture that again? Do you try to bring back Kai or Zev, or do you come up with a whole new crew?
It's tough. Fans are very protective of those original characters.
For sure.
But I actually think you could do both.
Oh, interesting.
Little hints of the old crew, maybe even some cameos if you could get the actors.
Yeah.
And then you build new characters alongside them.
Right. Like imagine a new captain, someone young and ambitious, trying to follow in Stanley Tweedle's footsteps. Or super smart but closed-off scientist who's dealing with the legacy of Kai.
Exactly. So much potential there. And you could even weave in those social themes that Lex was known for.
Right.
Explore things like AI, genetic engineering, even like the ethics of space travel, but through a modern lens.
It's like Lex was way ahead of its time in a way. A new version could really get people talking again.
Absolutely. The key is to honor the original, but also let the reboot be its own thing. Don't just rehash what's been done before.
Yeah.
Give it a fresh start.
And that's what makes this whole conversation so fun, right? Thinking about what could be. The audience is out there, they want something different, something that makes them think, and Lex could totally be that.
Totally. So for everyone listening today, next time you're watching Lex, think about what you would want to see in a reboot. What needs to stay the same and what would you change? What wild new direction would you take it in?
That's what a good deep dive is all about, right? Not just giving answers, but getting people to ask the right questions and keep the conversation going.
Exactly. Who knows, maybe these conversations will inspire someone out there to actually bring Lex back.
One can hope. Thanks for geeking out with us about Lex, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring those strange corners of the TV universe and never be afraid to embrace the weird.